Hi, and welcome to the Yale Daily News Multimedia, this week's segment of Everyone Has a Story. And I am here today joined with our Assistant Secretary of State and U.S. Ambassador Rick Barton. So, Mr. Barton, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Great, thank you. My pleasure.
Your State Department for the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Organization has been effectively has been in effect for the past year. So can you tell me a little bit about how the organization was created and how you decided to focus so many of your resources, 80% really, on 4 distinct regions?
Sure. I think the last Secretary of State, Secretary Clinton, and a number of her predecessors felt that the United States could be more effective in conflict and crisis situations, that we had not, whether we spent $3 million in a place or $3 trillion, that we weren't really getting the results that we wanted. And so it would help, they felt, to have a center of excellence within the State Department that really worked on these issues and really had a lot of experience in this space. So that's how it was created. But in the first year, since we were a fairly small, new organization, you have to figure out how do you get traction, how do you have an influence within a larger, well-established bureaucracy. And one way we thought we could have influence is to do our work, take most of our work, and try to be effective in 2 or 3 places that really matter to the United States. So that's how we decided to get involved with working on Syria, on Kenya, on North Central America, in particular Honduras, and on Burma. And so that gave us a chance to work in different parts of the world, different kinds of conflict, different stages of conflict, but we think all of those are places that matter to the United States where we can make a difference.
And you have to have a different strategy for each region. So
pretty much. So
how do you go in with trying to come up with how you're going to change some of the underlying structural elements of a particular area, and how you balance out dealing with the security versus the economic forces versus the political structures?
We try not to arrive with too much of a pre-cooked idea. And so really the heart of our methodology is to make sure that we listen to as many local voices as possible before we really commit to the activities that we might do. So in a place like Syria, which is really tough because we haven't really been able to work inside of Syria, since the revolution and the U.S. breaking off diplomatic relations, we haven't had an embassy presence inside of Syria. So we're working out of Turkey and to a lesser extent in Jordan with Syrians as they cross the border. But even in that case, we still want to talk to them and hear what they think is most needed and what's most important. So we won't be drifting off to the 5th or 10th most important thing, but we'll try to be focused on one of the 2 or 3 most important things that happen to be going on in their lives and in the case of their country at that point. So it's very much driven by local voices from the front end.
So then, just today, the U.S. State Department announced $60 million that would be donated to non-arms in Syria. So how is that decision made then? Instead, because I know that in other areas had been vocalizing that they would like arms. So how did you try and balance out those?
Well, most of the Syrians that you talk to, the one thing that's most on their mind right now is the bombing and the attacks by missiles. And the United States has not gotten involved in that side of the conflict at this point. But what we are trying to do is to provide humanitarian assistance and non-lethal assistance to as much of the Syrian opposition as possible. The decision is made typically by lots of people being involved, and ultimately the Secretary of State signs off on it, the White House signs off on it. Some of those resources are actually going through our bureau. And what we're doing is non-lethal assistance to the non-violent opposition. This gets a little bit difficult in a place like Syria because it's not as if people are just fighting or they're non-violent. There are many people who are obviously both, and how we address that challenge is what Secretary Kerry was talking about today.
So what do you think then really, what would you like to see go into Syria that would really help rebuild the nation? Because just last week The Economist came out with its front cover that said, is it a doomed state? Is it going to be failed? And I think that's one of the really important questions. How do you really address what's the best way to go forward? Mm-hmm. And is there a future there?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've had a chance in a couple of the trips that I've had to Turkey to meet with about 100 various members of the Syrian opposition, and I've been extremely impressed by their basic capacity, their commitment to a peaceful future for their country. So I tend to be a little bit more optimistic than some people about what might come after all of this fighting. But the bad news is that obviously 70,000 or so Syrians have already died. There are tens of thousands more in prison who could well die, may never get out of it. And so what we're trying to do is to make them as effective today as possible, so to shorten the conflict and to give them more capacity to lead peacefully when Assad falls. And so, I mean, that's, in terms of the individual help that they're going to need, probably the thing they're going to need most early on will be help in the public safety and rule of law space, so that there's not continuing violence after the war.
Thank you very much. Reporting for Yale Daily News Multimedia, this is Danielle Trubow on Everyone Has a Story.